So, point number 3, editions. So different scores you buy from different publishers will look different, particularly if the pieces are older. This is because the editors and the publishers will often fill in things that they think should be there in order to make the score a bit more informative and a bit more helpful, but sometimes this isn't necessarily what we want. Instead of the editor making the decisions for you as to where should be forte, where should be piano, where there should be any hairpins, what you maybe want is the original score, particularly if it's earlier music where there's very little dynamic marking, kind of helpful expressions. If it's kind of a bit more plain, like it was written, then that gives you the choice as to where you want to put the piano, the forte, the hairpins, instead of some random publisher you've never met deciding for you. So the reason why this has happened is there's kind of a domino effect over time, in that if Beethoven gave his publisher a score, his publishing house and the editors would look at Beethoven's handwritten score, which, let's face it, was kind of messy, and if they looked at it and they think, oh okay, I can't quite read his handwriting here, Beethoven's written an A but it looks more like a G because it's a bit smushy, and they put the G in their first published copy, and this happens quite a lot. It's an honest mistake, it's a very human thing to do. So if this happens, then it goes into circulation with the mistake of the note. So then later, when the work gets republished by a different publishing house, then they will take the already published copy and they'll think, there's a G here which doesn't really fit with the chord. I mean, it's okay, but in the repeat later, that G is not there, it's an A. So if that doesn't match, I think this is a mistake. We should make the second one a G as well. So then you've got more mistakes and it becomes a domino effect as time goes on. So what you really want to be looking for is the most authentic edition you can get, and these are different publishing houses for different composers. It's not like there is one that is universally good for everyone, and also often these are very expensive. I'm not going to beat around the bush. If you want to get text is very, very good in general. If it says text, most of the time this is the copy that you want. You know, if you have a Schirmer's there and an text there, the text can be twice as much as the Schirmer's, but then the Schirmer's will contain more mistakes because they are very, very heavily edited. So we're going to look to comparison of one of these works with different publishers. This is a good thing about living with another concert pianist. We have so much piano music between the two of us, it's ridiculous. It takes up the entire house, I tell you.
So notice how even in the first few bars there are quite a lot of differences. In the version on the right hand side, this is a Schirmer's, it starts with a piano and there's no dynamic marking in the Paderewski edition. In the left hand, the Schirmer's, there is fingering underneath, there's no fingering in the Paderewski on the left, and even the slurs, the first bar of the left hand, on the left hand side, the Paderewski, the slur goes over 3 notes, and in the Schirmer's it only goes over 2. So with these amount of differences, how can we even say how to play this?
So as a final point here, in order to make your decisions on the best thing to do, another thing you can do is actually look for the facsimile itself. So this is the original handwritten score. Particularly for older works, quite a few of these are available online on IMSLP and so on. So you can actually see the original and you can really pick it apart if this is, you know, maybe don't do this with an orchestral piece, that'll take years. But if it's just a little piece, have a look over it and say, okay, yeah. There's quite a big early music revival going on at the minute, and this has been going on for quite a while. And one of the things is the kind of period performance, so you perform it on instruments of the period and it is as authentic as possible. And they will go to extraordinary lengths to get it as authentic as possible. And because this is very popular to do nowadays, a lot of reliable publishers and editions are trying to make their scores as reliable and as close to the original as possible. So this doesn't mean to say you can only use old editions. Just have a quick Google. What is the best edition to have of Beethoven, Chopin, whoever you're playing? And then that you can see kind of online which one people are saying. Ask your teacher as well. Yeah, and see how it goes. So, point number 4, recordings. So, this doesn't really work so well with older works. This generally only kind of applies to 20th century works because you didn't have any kind of audio recording much before then. This kind of came about in the late 19th century. And the thing that is really good to look for is if there is a recording available of the composer playing the work itself. So this is the case for several 20th century composers. The composer-performer identity has been very popular for centuries because you're going to learn to play an instrument first and then you're going to think, you know what, I quite like writing, and then it's going to keep going and you can snowball and the two of them kind of come together. Not always the case, but very frequent. So a really good example of this again is Rachmaninoff. He recorded all of his piano concerti as the soloist, as well as some of his smaller works, and these are a great resource if you're playing Rachmaninoff, because then you can see, okay, well, how did he play it? And then that can inform how you play it, as well as just looking at other people who have played it since. Another example, which is a very interesting one and not necessarily as easy as, okay, I'm going to listen to Rach because he is like the most impeccable performer ever. Not 100% true, close, let's be honest, but something that involves a little bit more kind of figuring out is Shostakovich. Now there's no doubt that Shostakovich could play the piano and he recorded a lot of his works himself. However, he was one of the most nervous people and nervous performers that all of the recordings you hear of his work are very, very rushed, and there are quite a few mistakes. He can get a little clumsy at times. However, the emotion and the nuances that he puts in are very, very interesting and very special. So if you're playing Shostakovich, this is a very, very good thing to listen to. However, you have to take it in mind that, you know, he really didn't want to be there. He'd kind of play the piece as fast as possible so it would be over as quickly as possible and he can run and spend the rest of the night in the bar. So what happens when you're in this situation if the composer is not the greatest performer ever? Doesn't mean to say that they're bad or you shouldn't listen, but if you want a little bit more accurate information, if that's the right word, don't know. Maybe accurate's a bit strong, but a slightly different interpretation that's still authentic is to look at a friend of the composer or a colleague who the pieces were written for and who worked with the composer extensively on bringing the works to life. So, if you're listening to Shostakovich's Preludes and Fugues, for example, if you're going to play one of these, then definitely listen to Shostakovich's recording, but also have a look at Tatiana Nikolaeva. So she was the performer who all of the Preludes and Fugues were written for. She worked a lot with Shostakovich on them, they recorded them, so do have a listen to both. It's very interesting to hear both of the takes, which are both authentic, and use these to kind of inspire your own version of the work, so what you want to do and how you want to play it as well. And this doesn't mean to say that you just need to copy both of them or merge them together. Definitely put a bit of yourself into your works, but think about what you want to make your own, why, what bits you're going to use from them, what bits you not like, and things like that. This isn't about a correct or incorrect way of doing things, it's about making informed decisions on how you bring the piece off. It's also worth noting as well that Rachmaninoff was an incredibly nervous performer, and there are actually accounts that he would have to be pushed literally onto the stage in order to actually play. Granted, in the recording studio you have time to get a bit comfier, but it's still a very nerve-wracking experience. However, I personally don't think that you can hear that Rachmaninoff is nervous as much as you can hear that Shostakovich is nervous, but they're both incredibly, incredibly interesting, and always have a look at these things.